Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Jay Dong from BCT Partners. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. This is the fifth and final session of the Foster Youth to Independence webinar series. For those of you who are new to the series, we encourage you to check out the recordings of the previous sessions on HUD Exchange. For those of you who are returning from attending the previous sessions, thank you for staying engaged and offering your feedback and comments. Today, we'll be covering the topic of voucher program administration. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing support from HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing that made this series possible. Next, I will go over some housekeeping items. During today's session, we'll ask you to use the chat box at the bottom right corner of the screen to input your questions, comments, and feedback throughout the presentation and during the Q&A at the end. Please direct your questions and comments to all panelists. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send me a direct message so that I can help you troubleshoot the issue. We will also be taking several live polls during the presentation. Please follow the instructions on the screen to access Mentimeter on your mobile device or your computer to participate in the polls. Now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First, my colleague from BCT Partners, Ms. Annette Rodriguez, an experienced case manager who has expertise working with seniors, families, children, and especially at-risk teens in the affordable housing setting. Next, my colleague, Ms. Abigail Elford. Abby is our in-house child welfare specialist who has years of experience working directly with the county and state-level child welfare agencies, as well as the Children's Bureau. The other panelist we have is Ms. April McMillan, our consultant with lived experience. April is a current FYI voucher holder whose insights and lived expertise helped guide the development of this entire webinar series. Last but not least, we also have Ms. Michelle Daniels, Ms. Celia Carpentier, Ms. Kristen Arnold from HUD with us today. Before I go over the agenda, here's an overview of the entire webinar series. We have also listed a link to the HUD Exchange page where all the recordings and related materials are hosted at. We anticipate that you will have questions pertaining to the voucher program guidelines today. However, due to the time constraint, we will not be able to answer all of them. Contact information for seeking further clarification on matters related to program guidelines and voucher administration will be provided at the end of the session. Any questions that we do not answer live today will also be forwarded to the appropriate panelists or HUD staff at the conclusion of the webinar. Now let's move on to the agenda. In today's webinar, we'll go over a high-level recap of the previous 4 sessions to highlight some key takeaways before we explore the critical components of FYI voucher administration. Then we'll spend some time discussing considerations for project-basing FYI voucher. Lastly, we will look at how to best meet the needs of the youth throughout each phase of the voucher administration process. Here are the goals of the webinar, which closely align with what I just shared on the agenda slide. Now let's move into the high-level recap. In the first webinar, Introduction to Child Welfare, we spent a significant amount of time orienting the audience to the needs of the youth, as well as the typical experiences and challenges faced by youth in foster care. We hope you were able to gain a deeper understanding of how the lack of support, resources, and opportunities afforded to youth in foster care directly leads them to feeling lonely, lost, unwanted, and most importantly, unprepared to be on their own. Facing higher risk of becoming homeless soon after exiting the foster care system, young people are more likely to be involved with the justice system, underground economy, dealing with a myriad of hurdles such as substance dependency, unemployment, and early pregnancy. In the second webinar, Partnership Development and Maintenance, we emphasize the importance of leveraging the collective impact model to facilitate ongoing collaboration amongst the PHAs, PCWAs, and the third-party community partners. The model grounds the partnership in a common agenda to help build self-sufficiency for FYI youth via stable housing and supportive services. It establishes shared measurements so the partners can agree to track progress in the same way consistently, which allows for continuous improvement. It encourages ongoing communication, which leads to the building of trust amongst all partners. And finally, it fosters mutually reinforcing activities to maximize the impact. For this collective impact model to be effective, each partner must designate staff, time, and other resources to help build a strong backbone that can orchestrate the work of the group. In the same webinar, we talked about each partner's roles and responsibilities, which we won't cover at length today, but nevertheless, they're listed on the slide again for your quick reference. One thing I do want to point out and highlight is the time limit for the youth program that has been extended by the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunity Amendments for youth who meet certain requirements. More information on this can be found in a Federal Register notice published on January 24th this year. We're going to provide some additional details on this later on in the presentation. Now, moving on to the third webinar, where you got a chance to hear from our youth consultants, April and Suzanne, on the importance of integrating young people's voices and perspectives in decision-making. This practice is not only the ethical thing to do, but it also provides strategic benefits to all entities within the collective impact model and the work that the group is set out to do. By sharing your power with the youth and incorporating their input in decision-making, you actively honor their lived expertise and solicit their buy-in on potential solutions and procedures that are human-centered and rooted in evidence. More significantly, you're helping to build their confidence and leadership skills and getting them one step closer to become a self-sufficient adult who can advocate for themselves. In the fourth webinar, Data-Driven Success, we provided guidance on how to leverage and utilize data through the different points of the FYI program to generate success. A particularly helpful tool we shared was the simple logic model, an illustration of roadmap of how your program is intended to work. It depicts the relationship between your program's activities and its intended effects. We start from the left with the problem we're trying to address, then move right to the inputs or what you're investing into the program to address the problem. From there, you move right to the outputs, where you have the activities, meaning what you do, and your participation, meaning who you reach. Next is outcomes, short-term outcomes, meaning what changes do you expect to see because of the activities, and long-term outcomes, meaning what changes you expect to see down the road. Ultimately, as you move along this map, you land at impact, which is what it looks like when the problem has been addressed effectively. Now, with these implications for the FYI initiative, we conclude the high-level recap of the 4 previous webinars. Now, before I turn it over to my colleagues Abby and Annette to walk us through the critical components of voucher program administration, I would just annotate and emphasize again that building trust with young people in your program and leveraging their input and experiences will lead to better program outcomes and long-term impact. Now I'll pass the mic to Annette to kick off the next section.
Thank you, Jay, for that recap. The first critical component that we would like to discuss is the waiting list administration. PHAs should review their administrative plan requirements having to do with selection and submission of applicants from the PHA waiting list. Once the PCWA submits the referral of an eligible youth, the PHA must verify the referral with applicants already on their HCV waiting list. Any youth matching the referral must be assisted in order of their position on the waiting list. Any youth certified by PCWA as eligible and not on the HCV waiting list must be placed on the waiting list. That is pending HCV verification determination. PHAs must administer a single waiting list for the HCV program. So if a youth is selected for FYI, they will have been selected from the waiting list for HCV assistance. If the PHA has a closed HCV waiting list, it must reopen the waiting list and place the FYI applicant youth who is not currently on the PHA's HCV waiting list. The PHA may reopen the waiting list to accept an FYI eligible youth without reopening the waiting list for other applicants. Therefore, PHAs can keep their waiting list open only for FYI referrals from PCWAs. Once a youth is provided with an FYI voucher, they must be removed from the HCV waiting list. If there are concerns about what happens after the voucher expires, and if the youth continues to need rental assistance, a PHA can adopt a waiting list preference to assist youth leaving FYI that are at risk of homelessness. We will now move on to the referral process. When talking about the referral process, it is important to manage the flow between partners identifying eligible youth. PCWAs and PHAs should have regular check-ins to come to a consensus about eligible youth to prioritize or target. The PCWA is encouraged to consider how they're prioritizing youth for referrals. The intent should be to ensure that youth are prioritized for housing resources and related services based upon level of need and appropriateness of the intervention. So think about who in your community is more likely to take advantage of the program, who is more at risk of becoming homeless in your community, who is in need of supportive services, and so on. The youth does not have to have been in the custody of the PCWA that is partnering with a PHA to administer FYI vouchers. The partnering PHA has the responsibility of verifying that the youth meets all eligibility requirements. Once the PCWA identifies young people that meet the eligibility criteria, you still have to make referral decisions based on the number of vouchers available. So for instance, if there are ample vouchers available, then you want to make the referral. But if you have a few or very limited number of vouchers, then you will have to decide which youth to refer and make the request. PHAs may either request an FYI voucher through the non-competitive process under Notice PIH 2021-26 if it does not have an FYI voucher available, or the PHA may use an existing FYI voucher due to turnover or to receive FYI vouchers through the competitive NOFA process. It's also good practice to communicate regularly with the youth being referred to keep them updated on the process. This keeps them informed and invested in continuing to pursue the voucher and ultimately helps them to be successful when leasing up. PHAs should communicate with PCWAs when youth is leased up as part of the communication process. Next slide.
And now we're going to take a minute to take a live poll. Please access the poll by going to www.menti.com and use the code 96860687. I'll stop sharing the slides and go to the poll. Again, the question we're asking is, what are the challenges in managing the referral process and how do you handle them? We'll give folks a minute to access the poll and provide your input. Some really insightful feedback here offered. We're going to use these poll questions and your responses to help us facilitate the final peer-to-peer session tomorrow. So we encourage you to join that tomorrow if you are available. And we'll be sure to send out the invite following this webinar today. Let's go back. I'm going to leave this live poll open so you can still take your time to provide your input, but we're going to go back to our presentation here. Annette?
Thank you. We'll now move on to portability. So what is portability? Portability is leasing a dwelling unit with tenant-based housing voucher assistance outside of the jurisdiction of the PHA that initially issues the voucher, so the initial PHA. Portability of a participant is handled the same way as regular housing choice vouchers. So a PHA may not restrict or deny portability for a FYI participant for reasons other than those specified in the HCV program regulations. A participant does not have to move to a jurisdiction that administers FUP or FYI, but the referring community would no longer have an obligation to offer supportive services. As for PHAs absorbing FYI TPVs or FYI voucher youth into its regular HCV program, there's nothing that precludes a PHA from absorbing the youth into its regular HCV program if it has vouchers available to do so. If the receiving PHA absorbs the youth into its regular HCV program, that youth becomes a regular HCV participant with none of the limitations of an FYI TPV or an FYI voucher. If an FYI participant ports to another jurisdiction under a billing arrangement, the initial and receiving PHA must work together to initiate the termination of assistance. More information on portability can be found in the HCV guidebook under Moves and Portability.
Now we're going to go take another live poll. And the question is, what are the challenges you experience when youth move in and out of your jurisdiction? We're going to go ahead and stop sharing this presentation and go to the live poll. I know some folks are still taking their time to finish the previous poll, and we're going to give them 1 second and to finish that. I know some attendees are actually messaging me privately to get the access code. So bear with me, folks. Stop sharing. And let's go to here. Now, the question we're asking again is, what are the challenges you experience when youth move in or out of your jurisdiction? And to access the live poll is www.menti.com and use the code 9686-0687. For those of you who joined us late, yes, the presentation slides will be made available after the webinar as well as the recording. All right, in the interest of time, we will leave the poll running so that you can still input your answers, but we're going to jump back to the presentation. So bear with me, folks, as I switch screens. I believe we're going to ask our youth consultant, April, to walk us through this particular slide.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So, there are there are important considerations for the FYI population to think about regarding portability. First off, recognizing that many youth in foster care may be placed in homes away from their community or where their family resides. The portability of these vouchers allow youth to take the voucher back closer to home. It also helps serve youth who are moving from other cities or jurisdictions for other reasons. Whether it's for new or more job opportunities, to be part of a new community, or because there's more housing options available. Generally, the portability of these vouchers can offer opportunities to youth, but it's also important for PHAs to be mindful that when they do move to or from a different jurisdiction, they are likely going to be disconnected from any supportive services that have been available to them. They may be moving to a jurisdiction that does not administer FYI, and therefore the specific supports and resources haven't been organized for this population. And the community they're coming from no longer has an obligation to offer the supportive services that may have been in place. So as youth are considering porting in or out of your jurisdiction, it's valuable to help them understand this aspect of that move and consider how they'll access supports they might need.
All right, let's go back to Annette to walk us through shared housing and family composition.
So as far as shared housing, any youth assisted with an FYI voucher may share a unit with other persons assisted under the HCV program or with other unassisted persons. So for example, two FYI participants decide to get a two-bedroom unit because of tight market situations. That unit should consist of a common space shared by the occupants of the unit and separate private spaces for each assisted family. With regard to family composition, after voucher issuance, the FYI voucher holder is treated the same as any other voucher holder on the PHA's program. For example, if the PHA allows a family member to be added after the voucher has been issued and the individual was otherwise eligible for assistance, the PHA could permit the individual to be added as a household member following the PHA's administrative plan.
Now let's take another poll question. The question is, have you had experience with youth using the FYI voucher in a shared housing setting? And what were the benefits and drawbacks? I'm going to go to our poll here so you can have access to that question. And we will stop sharing the presentation and get to the poll. Again, the question is, have you had experience with youth using the FYI voucher in a shared housing setting, and what were the benefits and drawbacks? Okay. Like before, I'll leave this open and we'll go back to the presentation. Annette, would you please walk us through the next slide?
Sure. The last component that we will be discussing under voucher administration is turnover. Turnover is based on the 36-month expiration of the voucher, not based on the age of the participant. Therefore, a participant may continue with the program until they have to receive the 36 months of assistance. Once a youth voucher expires, it is not permissible to reissue the FYI voucher to the same youth upon expiration of the 36 months. PHAs may choose to create a preference in their regular HCV program for persons whose FYI assistance is expiring and will lack adequate housing as a result of the termination from the program. However, it is not a requirement. The Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities, FSHO amendments allows youth who first leased a unit with an FYI voucher after the date of the enactment of FSHO, example December 27, 2020, to receive an extension of their voucher assistance for up to an additional 24 months if they meet the certain requirements. For more information, you can see the Federal Register notice published January 24, 2022. Now that we have covered these critical components of voucher program administrations, we will move on to project basing considerations. This is a quick overview of project basing for those who are not familiar with what project basing vouchers are. With project-based vouchers, assistance is tied to the unit, whereas tenant-based assistance is tied to the individual. The youth is required to lease at a specific development, whereas a young person with a tenant-based voucher can choose and lease privately owned rental housing in the community. The PHAs can use up to 20% of its housing. The PHA can use up to 20% of its housing choice vouchers for project-based vouchers. The HOTMA 118/2017 Federal Register Notice implemented the HOTMA provision allowing PHAs to project-based FUP vouchers, including FYI vouchers, without additional approval from HUD. Additional guidance on project basing FYI vouchers can be found in Notice PIH 2017-21. We provided a link below, which you can access as well. So why are PHAs considering project basing? There are many potential benefits of project basing. Here are just a few to consider. For the first benefit, project basing vouchers can encourage the production or rehabilitation of affordable housing when they provide developers and property owners the financial security of a long-term housing assistance payment or HAP contract. They can also increase affordable housing, which can be especially critical in areas with either low housing stock or high cost markets with low vacancy rates. For the second benefit, project-based vouchers enable PHAs to reserve units in low poverty areas for assisted families through a contract, often a long-term contract. Project-based vouchers can provide the financial security to encourage developers to initiate mixed income or affordable housing projects in high opportunity neighborhoods that will benefit FYI voucher holders. Under the third benefit, attaching PBVs or project-based vouchers to several units in the same property or to an entire development can better enable a property to provide on-site services. Also, a concentration of FYI voucher holders can make it easier for case managers to work with youth. Project-based vouchers projects may be developed to meet the specific needs of the FYI populations, such as disabled youth. Under the fourth benefit, rather than requiring all FYI voucher holders to search for affordable units whose owners will accept tenant-based vouchers, PHAs can establish project-based vouchers HAP contracts with owners so they can refer some families directly to the PBV projects. PBV projects are less likely to have additional screening criteria that would make more difficult for an FYI voucher holder to lease a unit. And for the last benefit, once a contract is in place, project-based vouchers may require less staff time than tenant-based vouchers because the project-based vouching program has some regulatory elements that are easier to manage than those of the tenant-based program. Now I will turn it over to April, who will talk about the benefits of project basing FYI.
Thank you, Annette. So in addition to the general benefits of project basing, there are specific advantages to project basing FYI vouchers hold that PHAs should consider. First, project basing vouchers can help address shortages of housing in communities where youth with vouchers are unable to find housing to use their vouchers. It also can minimize challenges youth often face when looking for housing, like landlords who are resistant to renting out units to young people, both because of their age and biases they may hold, and because of a lack of rental history. I first-handedly experienced these challenges when moving into my very own apartment with the FYI voucher. When FYI vouchers are project-based, the landlords are more likely to have a general understanding and perhaps more of a realistic expectation of this population of youth exiting the foster care system. Lastly, there are opportunities when project basing to design a program that really meets the needs of youth in your community, designating staff to assist with this program, and centralizing service delivery. I did not know about project basing for the FYI voucher until this webinar, so I think this is really interesting. I'm going to hand it over to Jay to do a poll.
Thank you, guys. Now it is time for our final poll question. Do you project-based FYI vouchers? And if so, what does it look like in your community? If not, why? We're going to go back to the live poll. I'm going to stop sharing the slides here. And give folks a minute to get to the poll. Again, the question is, do you project-based FYI vouchers? And if so, what does it look like in your community? If not, why? All right, I will leave this poll running and we'll go back to our presentation. I'm going to pass it back to April to kick us off on this next section on meeting youth needs.
Given the purpose of the FYI voucher program, which is to prevent youth exiting foster care from becoming homeless, the success of this program relies on meeting the needs of the youth. In order to meet youth's needs and have an effective FYI program, communities administering this voucher should understand the experiences of youth through the process and keep them engaged, and exercise best practices throughout the development and administration of this voucher program. Throughout this webinar series, we have reinforced the need to understand youth experiences. This starts with understanding experiences of youth in and exiting the foster care system in your community. It's also crucial to understand the unique experience, motivations, and needs of individual youth you're serving so that you can meet youth where they are and as best as possible tailor the program to what they need. For example, identifying and connecting them to supports and resources that meet their specific needs. You should be using data, research, and communication with partners to understand youth's needs, but most importantly, creating spaces to continuously gather feedback from youth in your community will help you build a successful FYI program. Going to hand it over to Jay.
Thank you, April. Now, throughout this webinar series, we share with you best practices that we hope you will consider for your FYI program. These practices include developing shared understanding of roles and responsibilities across partnership to support the youth in your community. This includes understanding what your own organization should be doing to support this program, as well as what your partners can do to support the target population. Communities should also be including and integrating youth in decision-making about the FYI program to be sure that their perspectives and experiences are guiding this program to meet their needs. So finding the places where you can invite youth in to provide feedback and really listening to what they're telling you is crucial. Develop partnerships with organizations and services in your community that meet needs that youth have identified for themselves, and collect and share data across partnerships that will help inform the development of FYI voucher program in your community is also very important. Whether that's helping identify what youth to target for this program, or what supportive services to offer, or whether project basing will be a valuable approach in your community. We hope you found this series to be helpful in developing your own FYI program to serve youth who are exiting foster care and keep them from becoming homeless. Now we'll have some time for questions from the attendees. Please address your questions to all panelists and use the chat box to input your questions. I think earlier we had a question that came from Sarah Phillips. Her question was, is the best option for the youth to go through the PHA where they reside, or where the child welfare agency is, even if or when they're different? I'm assuming you're asking a question of whether where the youth should go through if the PHA and the child welfare agency aren't aligned in terms of their jurisdiction demographically.
I would say that you would go with the PHA where they reside, because personally, my child welfare case was out of Denver County and I live in Jefferson County. That's where my last placement was, so that's where I had to move out from. So it was easier to do it in my jurisdiction rather than where my case was, because your caseworker really doesn't play a part in your FYI voucher.
You're correct, because the PHA are the ones that administer the program. So whatever jurisdiction the PHA is over, that is where the program will be administered. You can always port, like they just discussed about portability, but yes, it's better to do it within the PHA jurisdiction.
We had a question from Camilla Farr. With a 3-year time limit, how would a PHA project-based voucher a FYI voucher? I believe we do also have a panelist from HUD on. Kristen, are you with us?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Hey, Kristen. Can you provide some insights on this particular question with regards to how would somebody project-based an FYI voucher given that the 3-year time limit?
Well, I'm not as familiar with the FYI program and the time limit. So maybe Michelle or Celia can speak to that.
Sure, I can start with that. So yeah, you could project-based an FYI voucher, and then once the youth reaches the expiration of their FYI assistance, they would need to vacate the unit in order to, and then the owner would then need to lease the unit again to another FYI eligible youth. There are options if, for example, if the youth doesn't leave the unit, you could potentially substitute another unit at the project for the FYI unit. And then therefore so there'd still be the same number of FYI units on the HAP contract. It would just be a different unit. And then the owner would then lease to an FYI eligible youth in that unit.
Yeah, so that unit would just remain as a project-based FYI unit, but then it sounds like they wouldn't meet the eligibility requirements anymore for FYI. So then the PHA could work with them to continue assistance with something else, or hopefully they can maintain housing stability.
We have some other questions popping up. Karen House is asking, can we provide any highlights regarding the new PIH notice on January 24th, 2022, and how this will help the existing clients?
Sure, I can answer that. I think you're referring to what we mentioned earlier in the presentation, which is the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendments. Yes, that implementation notice was just published in the Federal Register yesterday, and HUD is going to be scheduling a webinar on that notice. So please be on the lookout for that. We don't have it, but I anticipate once we do have it scheduled, there will be registration information on HUD's FYI at website. So please keep checking the website, and then we should have that webinar information up shortly.
Thank you. Another question is, this is very sort of general. Someone is asking if we can give brief description on how their PHA can obtain the FYI voucher and what is the process, since they're not familiar with the FYI voucher program.
Hi, yes. So the FYI voucher program, you can send a request to FYI@HUD.gov. Also, if you go to the FYI webpage, there is a standard sample request email that you can use to send in your requests. And what I'll do is just go over everything to make sure all the questions are answered. And then you should receive an email letting you know if you approve or not, or if you need to make some adjustments. So it's really simple. Once you're working with your PCWA, you guys have, you're working together on this program, you go ahead and send in that request because you have to be partnered with a PCWA. And more information is on the FYI webpage. We also have FYI FAQs. If you don't find an answer in the FYI FAQs, you can also send an email to the FYI@HUD.gov. So it's really simple. Again, you can fill out the application and just send it in to FYI@HUD.gov.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Michelle said. As she mentioned, the first step in starting an FYI program is having that partnership agreement between the PHA and the Child Welfare Agency. I think that we might even have a sample partnership agreement on HUD's FYI website that you can use. And then once you have that established, it's notice PIH 2021-26, which goes through like how you can then apply for the FYI vouchers. Michelle, just make sure I got the notice number correct. I believe it's notice PIH 2020-26.
It is notice PIH, I'm sorry, yes, it is notice PIH 2021-26. However, there's an error in the notice, so that's why I would say go to the website to use the sample request email, because that sample request email in the notice is linking to an old one. So we have an updated one on the web page, and that will prevent any delays if you utilize the correct one from the web page.
Thank you, Michelle and Celia. Several other questions just came in. This particular one is asking for how are FYI voucher holders assisted when certifying a VAWA incident? Are they allowed to port out to any jurisdiction, or would it have to be a jurisdiction that also has the FYI voucher program?
No, an FYI voucher holder does not need to port to a jurisdiction that administers FYI.
All right, this next question is, what is the turnaround time for the FYI voucher to be sent to the PHA? I'm assuming this means when the request is submitted to HUD, and what is the turnaround time for HUD to issue the FYI voucher back to the PHA?
It's usually 60 days is the turnaround time before they receive ACC with the funding information. So once you send it in, it's reviewed, and then it goes through the processing with the Financial Management Department and then also the Financial Management Center. So we will assume about 60 days for that turnaround time.
Thank you. Another question is, if a youth is receiving an FYI voucher, can they be on the regular HCV waitlist at the same time for when HCV waitlists are longer than the time limit of the FYI voucher?
I'm sorry, they're asking, can you repeat that?
Sure. So if a youth is receiving an FYI voucher, can they be on the regular HCV waitlist at the same time for when the HCV waitlists are longer than the time limit of the FYI voucher?
So if the youth is on the HCV waiting list, once the PHA received the referral from the PCWA, they check the waiting list to see where the youth lies, and they go ahead and assist the youth. So if the youth is on the waiting list longer than the term of the FYI program, is that what they're saying? I'm a little.
I think they might be referring to, I think Annette might have mentioned it during the presentation, but I think so if a youth there's only one voucher HCV waiting list. So if the youth is selected for an FYI voucher from the waiting list, then they're no longer on the HCV waiting list. But I think if the concern is that the PHA maybe wants to be able to offer that youth a regular housing choice voucher once they their FYI assistance expires, they can adopt a preference for youth whose FYI voucher is expiring and who are going to be homeless or at risk of homelessness at that time. So then they would just I guess place them back on the waiting list, but they could then jump to the top or with the preference. But I think what they're saying is that once you select them for the FYI voucher, they do come off of the HCV waiting list.
And I'm hearing something about a preference. So like a PHA can have a preference for FYI youth. They can have a preference for that too. So that can be something that's also there in selecting a youth.
Thank you, Michelle and Celia. We have a question from Greg Williamson, stating that he's at a PCWA and they have an MOU with various PHAs now, and they can provide supportive services up to age 23 through Chafee. They're having a more difficult time finding partners for youth over age 23. He's heard about an individual letter that an individual can write to essentially sponsor the provision of supportive services on an individual basis. And his question is, do we have a copy of the format of this type of letter from HUD?
Celia, are you aware of that letter? I am not.
No, I'm not familiar.
Well, what I would say is that on the FYI webpage, we do have WIOA, which is another another third party that can help with providing supportive services. So I would see if they can reach out to that particular third party. But I'm not too sure about the letter. You can send us that question and we can find out more information about it. I'm not too sure about that letter, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
This is Kristen Arnold. I wanted to add something about the waitlist question specific to project-based vouchers. So you can have a separate project-based voucher waiting list. So an advantage to project basing maybe possibly is that, you know, they can sit on that housing choice voucher waitlist while they're in the PVV unit. So that is maybe a possible option because you can have the PHA, but the PHA, it's up to their discretion to have that separate waitlist. It could all be one waitlist as well.
Thank you, guys. Let's move on to the next question. Katie stated that public notice PIH 2021-26 states the requirements at 24 CFR 982.206 for giving public notice when opening and closing the wait list apply. Does that mean that we need to post a public notice via newspaper, etc., even though all referrals will come through the local child welfare agency?
Well, the public notice can just be limited for only FYI participants. So you don't have to open the waiting list. You can make a notification to the public, but it's not for everyone. It's just for the FYI youth. That's the only reason you'll be opening a closed waiting list.
All right. We have another question from Sarah Phillips. Knowing that youth exiting foster care are more frequently involved with justice system, do criminal history checks remain the same as the regular HCV program?
It's at the PHA's discretion. HUD has areas where a person cannot obtain a voucher, so they will have to go through the HCV eligibility. They will have to make sure they pass whatever the eligibility is for the housing choice voucher. So it's not going to be different because they're an FYI youth. So it will be the same across the board.
Thank you, Michelle. We got a question from Amy Gonzalez. Do you wait for the FYI voucher to come in before you go through normal PHA approval process for intake?
Is she saying funding? Is that I'm sound like she's asking if she's waiting for funding to come through?
I'm assuming so, yes. Let's see if she is replying.
Because once you have the MOU with the PCWA and you send in the request, you have to wait for the funding piece to come through to issue the voucher for them to go ahead and search for a unit. If she can clarify her question, she can either send it to FYI.HUD.gov. I'm not too sure what she's asking for. I'm just assuming, but if she can either clarify her question or send it to FYI.HUD.gov.
Yeah, she did just follow up stating that her question is regarding when do you determine eligibility?
Okay, so the PCWA determines child welfare eligibility and the PHA determines the HCV eligibility. So that's the time when eligibility is determined. Approval for the program is when they send the request into the FYI mailbox, and then I go through all the requirements and then send it forward. If it's approved, I'll send it forward to the financial management department to begin the processing on the funding side.
All right, thank you, Michelle. We got another follow-up question from Greg Williamson. He's saying, for the additional 24 months of FYI eligibility, where can he find a list of family self-sufficiency programs by state?
You can go on the FSS webpage. I could put the link in the chat for the FSS webpage, and they can find out, because there are a lot of PHAs that do administer the family self-sufficiency program. So you're more likely to find an FSS program with a PHA. So I will put a list. I'll put the the website in the chat for the the FSS webpage, so you can look into that to find out more details.
All right, we got a follow-up question from Sarah Phillips regarding timing. Is there a lapse in service if they need to reapply when the FYI voucher expires?
The PHA can what do you mean by if there's a lapse in service, if they have to reapply? Is this question trying to find out if the voucher can be if there's an extension for the voucher? What?
Yeah, we're gonna ask Sarah, would you please follow up on that, provide some more additional context of your question, and then we can get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, folks, we only got 2 minutes left of this webinar. We're going to stop taking your questions at this point and share the next slide here, so that we can offer some closing remarks and some contact information, okay? Thank you for participating in today's webinar. For the attendees who are interested in learning more about voucher program administration and exchanging ideas and best practices with others, I encourage you to participate in the final peer-to-peer discussion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll send out a follow-up email shortly that will include a link for you to join tomorrow's conversation. We encourage you to reply to the email message if you cannot join but need further clarification on what was covered today and have additional questions or comments. This entire webinar series has been recorded, and the recordings along with the copy of each presentation are available on HUD Exchange. If you have additional questions pertaining to the FYI guidelines and voucher administration, please direct them to FYI@HUD.gov. And for additional information and resources, including sample MOUs and FAQs, please visit the URL listed on this page. All right, I will now turn it over to Celia and Michelle at HUD to offer some closing remarks.
Great, thank you so much, Jay. And we just really wanted to thank everyone for their participation throughout this webinar series. We really hope that this webinar series has been helpful to those of you, those of you who are either already administering FYI, or those of you who are maybe not yet administering FYI, but are thinking of establishing an FYI program. At HUD, we really value the feedback that we've received through these webinars, and we really want to keep the conversation going about how we can continue to improve on the success of the FYI program. So as Jay mentioned, please feel free to email us with any follow-up questions at fyi@hud.gov. And finally, I wanted to highlight again that, as we mentioned, the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Notice was published yesterday in the Federal Register. Like I said, we will be hosting a webinar soon. We don't have an exact date yet, but please keep on the lookout for that. At the very least, it'll at least be posted on I expect it to be posted on HUD's FYI website. So please keep checking back there for webinar information. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. This will conclude our session. Have a great day.
Great, thank you.